In this video, we're going to be looking at factoring trinomials. Now, the trinomials that we're going to look at, we're going to look something like this. 8x squared plus 13x minus 6. So we're talking about some of the more difficult looking trinomials. Now, if this lead coefficient were 1, it would be a pretty simple problem for us to factor. But when it's not, we got to think about another way of doing this. So the most common way is to do something called the AC method. Now the AC method means that you take the lead coefficient and the constant term and you multiply those guys together. So the way I do this is that I ignore signs for right now, and I just look at doing 8 times 6. So that product is 48. And then what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find factors of 48 that will subtract to 13. So that's where I use that sign right there. I use the negative that's in front of the 6 to tell me what I want the factors of 48 to do. Now, if you've got a calculator, you can go through and find all of the factor pairs. So if you look at 48, you know that you could write this as 1 times 48. You've got 2 and 24, 3 and 16, 4 times 12, 5 does not go into 48 evenly, so we skip down to 6, and we get 6 times 8. So these are all the factor pairs of 48, and we're trying to find that pair, that combination, where the two factors have a difference of 13. And that's going to be these guys right here, the 3 and the 16. And so here's how we use that. And this is just one of many ways of factoring. So what we do is that we can take the 3 and the 16, and we're going to use that to rewrite that plus 13x that we have right there. So I'm going to do 8x squared. Now I'm not going to worry about the signs just yet. I'm going to get to that here in just a moment. And I'm going to say, I can rewrite this with a 3x and 16x. And then there's the minus 6. So here's the time where you've got to pay attention to your signs. You need to take 3 and 16, and with the right signs, combine these guys to get a positive 13. Now, if this middle term is positive, whatever the sign is here with the middle term, is going to be the same sign of the larger of these two terms. So that means the 16 has to be positive. And in order for us to have a positive 13, that means this guy's going to be negative. So when you take a negative 3x plus 16x, you get a positive 13x. If you'd made both of these positive, that middle term would have been a positive 19x. If you had made the 3 positive and the 16 negative, you would have had a negative 13x. So this is the only combination that's going to work for us. And then from here, it's all about factoring by grouping. So we've got 4 terms, and we've created our 2 groups. So in this first group, you have a common factor between 8x squared and 3x of x. So you factor that out, and we are left with 8x minus 3. And then we go to the second group. Now pay attention that the second group begins with a positive, so whatever the sign is there is the sign that you bring down here. And the common factor for 16x and 6 is 2. So we're going to factor out, divide out the 2 from each of these. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. So we've got 8x. And then negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. And you know that you're on the right track when these guys are exactly the same. These guys are both 8x minus 3. Now before you go on, just take a moment to multiply everything out to see that it does check out. If I distribute the x back, x times 8x is 8x squared, x times negative 3 is negative 3x. And then here, 2 times 8x is 16x, positive 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So for our last step, we put everything together. 8x minus 3 is that common factor that we write out front. And 8x minus 3 was connected to both x and 2. So 8x minus 3 times x plus 2 is the factorization for this polynomial. And the way that you can check this out is to just FOIL. Multiply everything back out to see that you do get the original problem. 8x times x is 8x squared. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. And then you check your inside and outside pieces. On the inside here you get negative 3x. On the outside is positive 16x when you do that product. So positive 16, negative 3 gives me positive 13x. And that's really how all of these trinomials are going to go. Now, sometimes you have to be careful, because sometimes you might have a common factor that you have to take out, or maybe there's a leading negative that's in your way, so you can factor that guy out. So let's take a look at this one right here. We have 20x squared plus 21x plus 4. Is there a common factor for all three terms? And the answer is no. There's nothing common between these two guys, so that means there's not going to be anything common for the whole thing. Alright, in the last problem we did the AC method, so over to the side. A times C means 20 times 4, and the product here is 80. And what we want to do is that we want to find factors of 80, so you want to be able to multiply to get 80, and you want those factors to add to get 21. Now, if you're having a hard time figuring out how to come up with these, you can always do division with your calculator. Take 80 divided by 1, divided by 2, divided by 3, and so on, until you run through the list of all of the factor pairs for 80. Now, if you have a graphing calculator, there's something we can do using the graphing function. So let me show this to you. So we know the product is 80. If you go to y equals, for the first one here, you just want to type in x. And for the next one, when you're trying to find all these factor pairs, take this product 80 and do 80 divided by x. And then you can go to your table by pressing second graph, and we go to the table. Now this first line right here doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for us, because you're not going to be dividing by 0, right? But look over here. 1 goes in 80 times, 2 goes in 40 times, and so on. So you can find all of those factor pairs. And really, I guess I did more than I had to do. Let me go back and change this real quick. I don't know why I did x there. Wasn't really necessary for this, because here on the table, maybe this looks a little bit cleaner. So there we go. So look at your factor pairs. You've got 1 times 80. Here you got 2 and 40. 3 and a decimal, so that's not going to work out. We're looking for integer factors. You've got 4 and 20. Then you have 5 and 16. Let's see if we have anything else. Scrolling down here, 6 doesn't work, 7 doesn't work. Then we get to 8 times 10. And see, now you're back to 10 times 8. So you don't need to go any further here, because that's already mentioned right here. Now we're looking for the combination that will add to 21. And so when you look here, the sum of these two factors is 81, 42, 24, and these guys right here. That's that combination, because 5 and 16 multiply to 80, but they add to 21. So we're going to use those numbers to rewrite this plus 21x. So we're going to rewrite that using 5x and 16x. Now, to get the right sign so that you get a positive 21x at the end, I said that the sign of the middle term must match the sign of the larger of these two numbers. And in order to get a positive 21, this guy must also be positive. So we haven't really changed the problem. It's still the same as what we had before. It's just got extra pieces. So instead of saying 21, we're saying 5 plus 16. But what we can do now is that since we have 4 terms, we can factor by grouping, right? So in the first group, the common factor for 20x squared and 5x is 5x. 5 is the largest number that goes into both of those coefficients, and they both contain a factor of x. So we factor out the 5x, so 20 divided by 5 gives me 4. I had 2 factors of x, took out 1, so I just have x left over. Here, though, you got 5, and you factored out 5, but think about that as division. 5 divided by 5 means you have 1 left over. You had x, but you took out that x, so no more factors of x remain. Now you may say, but do we really need the 1? Yes, you need the 1 here. So that when you distribute, 5x times 4x is 20x squared, and then 5x times 1 to give you 5x. Without the 1, you wouldn't be able to get the 5x back. All right. In the second group, you see that you have a positive here to start that group off. And the greatest common factor for 16x and 4 is 4. All right, so we divide everything by 4. That gives me 4x. And the 4, factor out the 4, you are left with 1. And so we see that these guys are exactly the same. So that when we finish the factorization, you write that common factor, that larger common factor, 4x plus 1, we write that up front, times what it was connected to. And it was connected to both 5x and 4. And this is your factorization. We go through it piece by piece. We take our time. We know exactly what we're doing for every step along the way. Pay attention to your signs. Do the factoring by grouping, and you get here, and we're done. All right, so let's do a couple more problems. Factoring trinomials. All right, so let's look at this one. We've got 2x squared minus 13x plus 21. All right, there is no common factor, so there's nothing extra that we have to do at the very beginning, and so we do tend to go straight to the AC method. Okay, so the AC method says you take the lead coefficient 2 times the constant term 21. And this is part of that number game that we play. So 2 times 21 is 42. And now we need to find those factors. Find the factors of 42 that have a sum, so we use this sign right here, that have a sum of 13. Factors of 42 that have a sum of 13. Now if you think of it right at the very beginning, great. You don't have to go through all of your factor pairs. If you're not sure, let's come back here to the graphing calculator and let's try this out. Okay, so this is the guy we were working on before, so let's go to y equals. Let's change that 80 to 42. Go back to the table, and let's go back to 1, right? And we can use this to list all of our factor pairs. All right, so we have 1 times 42, 2 times 21, which we already knew. We have 3 times 14, 4 doesn't work, 5 doesn't work, then we've got 6 times 7. So these are all the factor pairs that we have for 42, and if there's not a factor pair that works, then we can't factor this, and it would be prime. Now, I recommend that every time you do the AC method, anytime you're trying to do the factoring, list all of your factor pairs. Get in the habit of doing this, that way it's easier for you to remember what those factor pairs are, especially for something like 3 times 14. A lot of times we forget that that is a factor pair for 42. All right, so let's see how we're going to get the negative 13x. I need numbers that add to 13, and it's right here, 6 times 7. So we're going to rewrite this. 2x squared, I've got 6x and 7x and then plus 21. So the sign of the middle term is negative, which means the sign of the larger term here must also be negative. And in order to get a negative 13x at the end, the other guy must also be negative. Another quick thing that you can check here is that negative times negative is going to give you the positive here at the end. So there's that connection. All right, now it's time to factor by grouping. Here's my first group. My common factor for 2x squared and 6x is, let's look, between 2 and 6, the common factor is 2, and they both share a factor of x. So let's factor that out. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and you have one factor of x right there. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. You had x, you factored it out, so that's it. The second group begins with a minus sign, which means whatever the common factor is must also have a negative included with it. And the common factor for 7 and 21 is 7. So we're going to be factoring or dividing out negative 7. So negative 7x divided by negative 7 is just x. Positive 21 divided by negative 7 is negative 3, which is a good thing because these guys are exactly the same, x minus 3. All right, so big common factor of x minus 3, we like to write that in front, times 2x minus 7. Now, I've already told you this. Let me tell you this again. I did 6 and 7 here in this order, right? You could have done 7 and 6, and it still would have been the same thing. So I write my answer like this because of the way I do my factoring by grouping. You can also write your answer as 2x minus 7 times x minus 3, because this is really just multiplication, and when it comes to multiplication, the order doesn't matter. If you FOIL this to check or you FOIL that to check, you still get the exact same answer, right? Which is going to be this guy. Always make sure that you take the time to multiply to check your factorizations. All right. Let's do this last guy right here. 6x squared minus x minus 15. There is no common factor, although there is something common between 6 and 15. This middle coefficient is 1, so they don't have anything in common. So let's go and do that AC method. So a times c is going to be 6 times 15, and the product of 6 and 15 is 90. All right, now we need to find factors of 90, so let's make sure we write this, we know what we're talking about. I need factors of 90 that have a difference of, well, that's understood to be a 1, right? So we can go to the calculator. Now, again, try to be in the habit of working out these on your own, not always trusting on a calculator. But sometimes it's nice to be able to see what they are. So I want to do 90 divided by x and see my list of factor pairs. All right, so you've got 1 times 90, 2 times 45, you've got 3 times 30, 4 doesn't work. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's too high up there. We've got 5 times 18. Let's see, 6 times 15, of course. 7 doesn't work. 8 doesn't work. And then you get to 9 times 10. All right, so of all these factor pairs, there's only going to be one that works, if there is one that works at all. So we need to find a factor pair that has a difference of 1. And that's going to be this guy right here, 9 times 10. So let's rewrite this middle term. All right, so we got 6x squared. We're going to have 9x, 10x, and then minus 15. So, as we've said, whatever the sign is of the middle term is going to have to match the sign of the larger of these two terms right here. So the 10 is the larger term, so he also has to be negative. And to get a negative 1x, that guy's going to have to be positive. So it's really easy to see that you combine these guys to get a negative 1x. Again, check your signs. Always watch your signs. We have 4 terms, so we're going to factor by grouping. In the first group, the common factor for 6x squared and 9x is 3x. So 6 divided by 3 is 2, so that's 2x. 9 divided by 3 is 3. All right, in the second group, we lead off with a negative, so we need to make sure we have a minus sign here. The common factor for 10 and 15 is 5. So we are dividing or factoring out that negative 5. Negative 10x divided by negative 5 is 2, so that's 2x. Negative 15 divided by negative 5 is positive 3. And again, you know that you're on the right track with the factoring by grouping when these guys are the same, right? If they're not the same, you need to go back and check either your signs, make sure you check your numbers to see that everything works out right. It's very easy to be off by a sign, but you somehow think that it's going to be okay if these are not the same. No, these have to be exactly the same. Look at what I've done in these videos. Follow my example, and you're going to be all right. 2x minus 3 was being multiplied times both 3x and negative 5. And this is your factorization for that polynomial.